On August 11, 2014, the world woke up to devastating news. Robin Williams, the brilliant comedian and actor who had made millions laugh for 4 decades, had died at age 63. The initial reports suggested suicide caused by depression, and the world mourned the loss of one of entertainment's most beloved figures. But the real story, the truth behind Robin's death, was far more complex and terrifying than anyone initially understood. It wasn't until 3 months later, when the autopsy results were released, that Robin's widow, Susan Schneider Williams, and the world learned the shocking truth. Robin Williams had been suffering from an unusually severe case of Lewy Body Dementia, with protein deposits throughout his brain. Susan Williams would later describe it as the terrorist inside my husband's brain in a powerful editorial published in the medical journal Neurology. Robin had been losing his mind, and he was aware of it happening. Imagine the terror of feeling yourself disintegrating, of watching your own brain betray you and not understanding why. This is the story of Robin Williams' final year, a heartbreaking journey through confusion, fear, and desperation as he and his family searched for answers that wouldn't come until it was too late. It's a story that changed how America understands dementia and brought attention to a disease that affects 1.4 million Americans but remains largely unknown. To understand what Robin Williams lost to Lewy Body Dementia, we must first appreciate the extraordinary mind and talent that made him one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived. Robin McLaurin Williams was born on July 21, 1951, in Chicago. From his earliest days performing stand-up comedy in San Francisco clubs to his breakthrough role as the alien Mork in Mork and Mindy, Robin's comedic genius was unlike anything the world had seen. His mind worked at lightning speed, making connections others couldn't see, improvising brilliantly, switching between characters and voices with breathtaking ease. Directors famously couldn't keep up with him. They'd give Robin one take for the script and then let him improvise for hours, knowing he'd create comedy gold. But Robin wasn't just funny. He could also break your heart. His dramatic performances in films like Good Will Hunting, which won him an Academy Award, Dead Poets Society, The Fisher King, and Awakenings, showed remarkable depth and sensitivity. He could make you laugh until your sides hurt and cry until you had no tears left, sometimes in the same film. Throughout his career spanning more than 40 years, Robin brought joy to millions. He entertained troops overseas, supported countless charities, and was known for his generosity and kindness. People who worked with him universally described him as one of the nicest, most genuine people in Hollywood. By 2013, Robin was in his early 60s and still working steadily. He had his struggles. He battled addiction and depression throughout his life, but he'd been sober for years and seemed to be in a good place. He married Susan Schneider in 2011, and they lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. Life was good. Then, slowly at first, things began to change. The symptoms started gradually, with insomnia, constipation, and an impaired sense of smell. Robin began having trouble sleeping, a problem that would become increasingly severe. He started experiencing anxiety that seemed to come from nowhere. Before his diagnosis, Robin had been experiencing paranoia, confusion, insomnia, constipation, and lacking the ability to smell. For many people, these early symptoms wouldn't immediately suggest a serious brain disease. They could be attributed to stress, aging, or any number of minor health issues. But the symptoms escalated. Robin's desperation grew as he sought to understand a bewildering array of symptoms that soon spiraled into extreme anxiety, tremors, and difficulty reasoning. Susan watched her husband change before her eyes. The man who had always been so quick-witted, so mentally agile, was struggling with simple tasks. Robin developed a hand tremor. His gait changed. He began walking with a slow shuffle. His voice weakened. To anyone familiar with Parkinson's disease, these were classic symptoms. Robin was eventually diagnosed with Parkinson's disease a few months before his death, and both he and his doctors believed that explained what was happening to him. But the Parkinson's diagnosis didn't explain everything. Robin was experiencing symptoms that didn't fit: visual hallucinations, sudden behavioral changes, delusional thinking, and severe paranoia. He couldn't remember his lines while filming a movie, as his brain was overwhelmed by the disease. For an actor whose entire career depended on his ability to memorize lines, improvise, and perform, this was devastating. Robin knew something was terribly wrong, but he didn't know what. And more frightening still, the doctors couldn't figure it out either. For nearly a year, in a painful odyssey familiar to many patients, Robin tried to find out what was wrong with himself and fix it. He and Susan sought help from numerous medical specialists. They went to neurologists, psychiatrists, and other experts. Robin underwent tests and evaluations. He tried different medications. Susan later wrote, "My husband was trapped in the twisted architecture of his neurons, and no matter what I did, I could not pull him out." Imagine watching the person you love suffer terribly, watching them deteriorate mentally and physically, and being powerless to help them. The doctors couldn't tell them what was wrong or how to fix it. Robin's fear and anxiety had skyrocketed to alarming levels. He was experiencing visual hallucinations, seeing things that weren't there. He became paranoid, convinced that terrible things were happening or about to happen. His personality was changing in ways that frightened both him and his loved ones. The cognitive symptoms were perhaps the most terrifying. Robin Williams, whose brilliant mind had been his greatest gift, was losing his ability to think clearly. He struggled with memory. He had difficulty with reasoning and problem-solving. Tasks that had once been effortless now felt impossible. And through it all, Robin was aware. He was losing his mind, and he knew it was happening. Can you imagine anything more to feel yourself slipping away? To know that something is fundamentally wrong with your brain, and to be unable to stop it or even understand what's happening? On August 11, 2014, Robin Williams took his own life at his home in Paradise Cay, California. The world was shocked and saddened. Initial reports focused on his history with depression and suggested that mental illness had claimed another victim. But 3 months later, in November 2014, the autopsy results told a different story. The neuropathologist who performed the autopsy said it was one of the worst cases of Lewy body dementia he'd ever seen. Lewy bodies were distributed throughout Robin's brain and brainstem with a huge proliferation in the amygdala region. Susan Schneider Williams was stunned. Suddenly everything made sense. All of Robin's bewildering symptoms, the hallucinations, the paranoia, the confusion, the movement problems, the personality changes, they all fit with Lewy body dementia. This was what had been terrorizing her husband for the last year of his life. For Susan, finally learning the truth behind her husband's pain and suffering was like a pinprick of light, the beginning of her own healing. Robin wasn't crazy. He wasn't simply depressed. His brain had been under attack by a devastating neurological disease. The diagnosis explained why Robin had been so tormented, why he seemed to be disintegrating before everyone's eyes. Depression was not the underlying cause of Robin's suicide. Rather, it was a little-known brain disease called Lewy body dementia. So what exactly is Lewy body dementia? Lewy body dementia is a progressive brain disorder diagnosed when cognitive decline is an early symptom, or when cognitive decline and motor symptoms begin and develop together. It is the second most common neurodegenerative dementia, behind Alzheimer's. Lewy bodies are clumps of abnormal protein, primarily a protein called alpha-synuclein, that form inside nerve cells throughout the brain. These protein deposits interfere with the brain's normal functioning, causing a wide range of symptoms affecting thinking, movement, behavior, and mood. The disease has considerable overlap with both Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, which is why it's often misdiagnosed. Like Parkinson's, it causes movement problems, including tremors, stiffness, and shuffling walk. Like Alzheimer's, it causes cognitive decline and memory problems. But Lewy body dementia has its own unique features that make it particularly devastating. People with Lewy body dementia often experience vivid visual hallucinations. They might see people, animals, or objects that aren't really there. They can have severe fluctuations in alertness, being fully awake and coherent one moment, then confused and drowsy the next. They often act out their dreams physically during sleep, sometimes violently. The cognitive symptoms go beyond simple memory loss. People with Lewy body dementia struggle with visual spatial problems, making it hard to judge distances or recognize familiar objects. They have difficulty with executive function, planning, organizing, and problem-solving. They experience severe anxiety, depression, and paranoia. Approximately 1.4 million Americans currently have Lewy body dementia, but most people have never heard of it. Before Robin Williams' death brought attention to the disease, it was truly the most common disease you've never heard of. Looking back at Robin's final year with the knowledge of his Lewy body dementia diagnosis, everything becomes tragically clear. His symptoms included personality changes, confusion, forgetfulness, anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, and problems with movement. Friends, family, and film colleagues recognized he wasn't himself. One particularly heartbreaking detail: Robin was filming a movie called Night at the Museum, Secret of the Tomb in the spring of 2014, just months before his death. His co-stars noticed he was struggling. He couldn't remember his lines, something that had never been a problem for Robin before. He seemed confused and anxious, but he pushed through, completing the film. It would be his last. The hallucinations were especially distressing. Robin would see things that weren't there, terrifying visions his brain was creating. The paranoia made him believe terrible things were happening. The confusion made simple tasks feel impossible. And underlying it all was the awareness that something was profoundly wrong with his mind. Susan described Robin as being trapped in the twisted architecture of his neurons. He was imprisoned inside a malfunctioning brain, watching helplessly as his mental abilities deteriorated. For someone whose identity was so tied to his brilliant, lightning-fast mind, this must have been unbearable. The disease progressed rapidly in Robin's case. While Lewy body dementia typically develops over years, Robin's case was unusually aggressive. The autopsy showed that the Lewy bodies had spread throughout his brain with unusual severity, affecting nearly every region including his brainstem. After receiving the autopsy results and finally understanding what had killed her husband, Susan Schneider Williams faced a choice. She could keep this information private, maintaining Robin's public image as someone who died from depression, or she could tell the truth and bring attention to a disease most people had never heard of. She chose to speak out. In 2016, Susan published her powerful editorial in the medical journal Neurology titled "The Terrorist Inside My Husband's Brain." She wanted doctors, researchers, and the public to understand what Lewy body dementia really looks like, not as a list of clinical symptoms in a textbook, but as a lived experience of terror and confusion. Susan wrote the editorial addressing neurologists, hoping her husband's story would help them understand their patients along with their spouses and caregivers more deeply. She hoped that by sharing Robin's experience, she could spare other families some of the confusion and heartbreak they had endured. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell this story," Susan said. She didn't know what journey she was about to begin, but she felt compelled to turn Robin's suffering into something meaningful. Susan has since become a tireless advocate for Lewy body dementia awareness and research. She served on the board of the American Brain Foundation for 6 years and helped establish the Lewy Body Dementia Fund, which has provided millions in research grants. She worked on documentaries about Robin's experience, including Robin's Wish and Spark, Robin Williams and his battle with Lewy body dementia. Through her advocacy work, Susan has heard from people around the world who are dealing with Lewy body dementia. Families who spent years trying to get a correct diagnosis, patients who felt validated finally understanding what was wrong with them, caregivers who felt less alone, knowing that even someone with Robin's resources struggled to get answers. One of the most important messages from Robin's story is how difficult Lewy body dementia is to diagnose. Currently, there are no highly accurate diagnostic tests or accepted biomarkers for Lewy body dementia, and a definitive diagnosis can only be made during an autopsy. This means that while someone is alive, doctors must diagnose based on symptoms and clinical observation, but because the symptoms overlap so much with Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, depression, and other conditions, misdiagnosis is extremely common. Robin was initially diagnosed with Parkinson's disease based on his movement symptoms. This wasn't wrong exactly. Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia are closely related diseases, both involving Lewy body protein deposits in the brain. But the Parkinson's diagnosis didn't capture the full picture of what was happening to Robin. For many, the wide range of early symptoms, not all related to brain function, makes Lewy body dementia difficult to diagnose. The insomnia, constipation, and loss of smell that Robin experienced early on didn't immediately suggest a brain disease. By the time the more obvious cognitive and movement symptoms appeared, the disease was already advanced. Susan's thinking about diagnosis has evolved since Robin's death. When she initially wrote her editorial, she was convinced a diagnosis wouldn't have mattered because there's no cure. But her thinking has completely changed. Diagnosis is everything, not just for patients and caregivers, but for doctors, clinicians, and researchers. If they had received an accurate diagnosis, they could have sought specialized care. Knowing what was wrong might not have saved Robin's life. There is currently no cure for Lewy body dementia, but it would have helped him and Susan understand what was happening. They could have avoided some of the confusion and fear. They could have made informed decisions about treatment and care. And Robin might have felt less terrified, knowing there was a reason. Since Robin Williams' death brought Lewy body dementia into public awareness, there's been significant progress in research and understanding of the disease. The Lewy Body Dementia Association has formed a Research Centers of Excellence program with 22 sites across the United States collaborating on clinical trials and research. Scientists are actively investigating the causes of Lewy body dementia, looking at genetics, environmental factors, and other influences. There's ongoing research to identify biomarkers, measurable indicators of the disease that could allow for earlier and more accurate diagnosis. While there's still no cure, treatments are improving. Doctors now better understand how to manage the various symptoms of Lewy body dementia. Importantly, they've learned that people with this disease can have severe reactions to certain medications commonly used for other types of dementia or psychiatric conditions, so proper diagnosis is crucial for safe treatment. Susan Schneider Williams has been at the forefront of these efforts. She's helped fund research aimed at developing better diagnostic tools. She's educated healthcare professionals about the disease, and she's provided comfort and information to countless families dealing with similar situations. The awareness Robin's story has generated has been invaluable. Before 2014, most people had never heard of Lewy body dementia. Now it's a recognized term, and more patients are getting accurate diagnoses earlier in their disease course. Robin Williams' battle with Lewy body dementia teaches us several crucial lessons. Early symptoms matter. The seemingly unrelated symptoms Robin experienced early on, insomnia, constipation, loss of smell, can be early warning signs of Lewy body dementia. If you or a loved one experiences these symptoms along with cognitive or movement changes, discuss Lewy body dementia with your doctor. Diagnosis is everything, even when there's no cure. Knowing what disease you have allows for proper treatment, appropriate care, and peace of mind that comes from understanding what's happening. Advocacy changes lives. Susan's decision to speak publicly about Robin's disease has raised awareness, increased research funding, and helped countless families get accurate diagnosis and proper care. Mental health and brain health are connected. Depression and anxiety can be symptoms of underlying brain diseases, not just psychiatric conditions. This is why comprehensive evaluation is so important. We need more research. The fact that definitive diagnosis is still only possible after death shows how much more we need to learn about Lewy body dementia and how to detect and treat it. Robin Williams died too young, and his death was tragic. But his story has made a lasting impact beyond his incredible body of work as an entertainer. By bringing Lewy body dementia out of obscurity, his experience has helped thousands of other families get answers and appropriate care. The Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center now offers a live helpline and more than 8,000 resources for patients and families. Doctors are more aware of the disease and better at recognizing it. Research funding has increased dramatically. Clinical trials are ongoing to develop better treatments and diagnostic tools. Robin once said his last wish was, "I want to help people be less afraid." Through Susan's advocacy and the increased awareness his story generated, that wish is being fulfilled. People with Lewy body dementia and their families are less afraid because they better understand what they're facing. They're not alone in their confusion and fear. When we watch Robin Williams films now, whether it's the touching drama of Good Will Hunting, the infectious energy of Mrs. Doubtfire, or the heartfelt wisdom of Dead Poets Society, we see them through new eyes. We appreciate not just his extraordinary talent, but also his courage in the face of an invisible enemy attacking his brain. Robin Williams made the world laugh for 4 decades. He brought joy, wisdom, and humanity to every role he played. He was generous, kind, and deeply loved by those who knew him. And in his final year, he fought valiantly against a disease that was stealing everything that made him who he was. His widow Susan continues to honor his memory by turning his tragic death into meaningful progress in understanding and treating Lewy body dementia. Every family that gets an accurate diagnosis, every patient who receives appropriate care, every researcher who makes progress toward better treatments, they're all part of Robin's legacy. The terrorist inside Robin's brain took his life, but it couldn't take away what he gave us. His laughter echoes on. His performances still move us. And his story continues to help others facing similar battles understand that they're not alone, they're not crazy, and there are reasons for what they're experiencing. Robin Williams will always be remembered as one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived, but now he's also remembered as the man whose tragic death brought attention to a disease affecting 1.4 million Americans and inspired a movement to ensure others receive better diagnosis His wish to help people be less afraid lives on, and that might be his greatest performance of all.